All right, welcome to our lecture talking about inner cities and the challenges that they face as being distinct from suburban challenges. The slides were designed to accompany the book Cultural Landscape. I am, of course, Ms. Gall, and I'll be your host for the lecture. So when we talk about the challenges of inner cities, if you watched the previous lecture, then we went ahead and did some definitions of some terms. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump in here. We talk about the physical issues that are surrounding inner cities. Probably, arguably, the most significant is a deteriorating housing stock. And what that means is that houses are getting older, and like anything else that gets older, houses start to fall apart. And if people don't have the money to be able to afford to fix them up the way they should, then the houses just start to deteriorate. We also see a certain amount of filtering, people moving out as they can afford to, and also redlining that still arguably occurs in some places where banks basically refuse to lend within certain neighborhoods. Historically, that was because of they would just basically refuse to lend to people of certain races. But these days, it may have more to do with the person's credit history or with whether or not the house is going to be worth as much as the loan on it, and things of that nature. And the results are the same, but the means are different. So that's important to note. It's not banks going out and saying we're going to refuse to lend to this specific neighborhood. It has more to do with the fact that the people in that particular neighborhood may not meet the bank's requirements in terms of credit history and the like. What you also see in inner cities is, and this is a little bit more of a good thing in some ways, is urban renewal. And urban renewal just means that people are starting to move back into cities. Cities are starting to get fixed up a little more. Businesses are making the effort to try and spiff up the city a little bit. Parks are getting better, that kind of thing. And you also see, especially when we're talking about big cities like New York or Chicago, that have a long history in the 20th century of having these huge public housing projects, that they've started to break those up a little bit. And so what ends up happening is instead of having an apartment block of, say, across 2, 3, 4, 5 buildings, whatever it is, 1,000 apartments, they're starting to break those up and spread those out throughout the city, with the theory being that if we can get a variety of people living in a certain area, what that will do is prevent the concentration of the types of issues that tend to plague areas that are poorer, and it will allow everybody to live a higher quality of life. And then you also start to see an increase, we've also started to see recently an increase in people moving back into the city, of people renovating housing, renovating warehouse space and the like, in order to turn it into housing. And oftentimes this is wealthier folks who are white, who are moving into the cities because they want the advantages of living in the city. They like urban life. They want to be close to the bars and the theaters and to work. They don't want to have to drive, on and on and on. They move into these areas. They fix up the housing stock. And what ends up happening, we call this process gentrification, by the way. What ends up happening is they raise the property values for the entire neighborhood as they do this, and as there gets to be a critical mass. And gentrification is actually very controversial, because some of what ends up happening is you end up with people who, whether they've lived there or their families have lived in a neighborhood for generations, who are being actually priced out, because even though they own their home, they may not be able to afford the property taxes as property values go up and like. So gentrification is kind of a mixed bag. It makes the city look better, makes the city feel better, but it also has a tendency of kind of pushing out long-term residents of the city. So just to give you an example, right, we're going to talk a little bit about Chicago here. And what we're seeing when we look at this map here is what kind of change is going on between 1990 and the year 2000. And you can see when you just look at the map, red dots, by the way, Hispanic, black dots African American, green dots white, is that there's a certain amount of concentration that's occurred, and really this is historical concentration, right, for a variety of reasons. Redlining, discriminatory ordinances that didn't allow people of various ethnic groups or racial backgrounds to live in certain neighborhoods and like. Historically, that has resulted in clustering and in ethnic enclaves, and what we're starting to see slowly but surely more and more It's a little bit more blending and desegregation as we're going, which you also see if you see where that big cluster of green dots is right there on the water. That is if I had to lay my money, and I'm not familiar with Chicago, but if I would bet good money that that's a gentrified or gentrifying area of Chicago, and what you're seeing is that everybody else is getting kind of pushed out a little bit. So we start to talk about inner city social issues. What's happened historically, and again, this is slowly but surely changing in a lot of areas, is that there's what's called an underclass that lives in the cities, and for lack of a better term, really kind of gets stuck living in the cities because they can't afford to live anywhere else. It's where the big public housing projects are. They're not as well educated. They can't get the better jobs, so they can't afford to move outside of the city. Right? And when poor folks are clustered together, all together, what you end up with is an unending cycle of social and economic issues that reinforce each other. Right? So I don't have an education, so I can't get a good job, so I'm going to break the law because I see those guys down on the corner and they don't have educations and they can't get good jobs, but they're making really good money slinging drugs, right? And I want what they have, so I'm going to follow their path, right? That's what we're talking about with social and economic issues. You also see with this underclass is a large amount of homelessness that tends to flock into cities, and partially homeless folks tend to flock into cities because cities have better services and they're more designed to accommodate homeless folks, but also just because there are more places potentially where somebody who's homeless would be able to sleep and be at least marginally safe as one can be when you don't have your own space to call your own. Right? And with this underclass, you develop what many people call a culture of poverty. And that culture of poverty just means that based on your social class, there are certain ways that you look at the world and certain ways that you interact with people. And in inner city areas and in those housing projects and the like, if all you see are folks who act like you, who look like you, who are not getting ahead like you, then you're going to imitate those behaviors. And those behaviors are not the behaviors that are going to help you get ahead in life. Right? And not that there's anything against folks who are poor or things like that, but children live what they see. And as adults, we live what we saw as children. So if you're not exposed to a variety of people, if you're not exposed to a variety of perspectives, then that becomes what you know and what you ultimately turn into as you grow up. And that's why a lot of places are starting to break up those big housing blocks and move people out and spread people out, because ultimately what they find is it's more successful for everybody, right? The rich folks get reminded that, hey, life's good, but it wouldn't be hard for me to be them, those poor folks. And the poor folks see, oh, this is what it takes. This is how I act in school. This is how I interact with those folks over there, those wealthy folks, to make sure that I'm getting ahead, right? It's that, if you know the language, code switching that occurs when you move from one situation to another. A big part of the problem in inner cities as well, when we start talking about economic issues, are eroding tax bases. And that's just really a fancy way to say, as wealthier folks move out of the cities, and as businesses move out of the cities, then what happens is that cities have fewer and fewer people paying into their tax system, and that really gives them two options. One is they can reduce services, right? So maybe instead of picking up your trash every week, they pick it up every other week, for example. Or they cut the number of police officers and the like. Or they can raise taxes. And it's really kind of a conundrum, because if you raise taxes, you run the risk of pushing more people out of the city and ultimately lowering your tax base. Right? So you got to kind of figure out the balance there. And again, historically, this has been a real issue because we have cities, and the recession has been a huge piece of this. What we've had is cities that have huge deficits in terms of what they owe former employees for retirement benefits and the like, and being able to make sure that they're meeting those commitments while continuing to meet ongoing commitments to the people who currently live there, right? And the recession has been has really fed into this, because when the housing market collapsed, what happened is the tax value of properties went way, way down, and now people are paying less into the system, but the system still requires the same amount of money. And so cities have had to try and balance, how do we do that? And the result oftentimes is that services get cut. And so, for example, if we look at the city of Baltimore here, what we can see, right, and these are zip codes, by the way, that they're those numbers on there. We can see, depending on the zip code, there are lots of foreclosures, some foreclosures, or a few. And I bet you if we looked at that dark green zip code, that 21223, that's probably a poorer, potentially a poorer area, right? It's going to go one of two ways. Either it's going to be relatively wealthy and people bought above their means, or it's going to be poorer and people have lost their jobs and can't afford their homes anymore. Those light green moderate areas on the edges, I bet you anything those are wealthier folks who spent above their means and as a result ended up not being able to afford their house when they lost their job in the recession. Right? Foreclosure, by the way, just means that the bank takes back the title on your house and they kick you out. So what we've been talking about with this lecture, and I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here because we're at the end of our slides. We talked a little bit about some of the specific issues that cities face, and we talked a little bit about that culture of poverty and what that can mean. We talked a little bit about the concentration of poverty and what that can mean. We talked about some of the specific issues. So those two were social issues, really. We've talked about some of the economic issues in terms of tax bases and the like that cities face. And we've also just talked a little bit about the Great Recession and what that's meant for cities and what role that has played in forcing cities to really consider what are their priorities. So if you have any questions, I'd be delighted to answer them. Please just bring them into class, and I'll see you the next time we meet.